Okay, good afternoon, everyone. My name is Kiyoteru Tsutsui, and I'm the director of the Donia Human Rights Center. Thank you for making it to this panel on a really bad condition outside. It is my pleasure to present this panel session to you, Human Rights in North Korea, Crimes Against Humanity, Advocacy for Change, and Future Prospects. I'd like to start by thanking our co-sponsors, the University of Michigan Law School, the NAM Center for Korean Studies, and the International Policy Center at Ford School here. Okay. Now, North Korea, it's still one of the most enigmatic countries in the world. We seem to know a little bit about it, and there's really no shortage of news coverage on that country, but much of that has been focused, especially in recent months and years, on the nuclear weapons capabilities and the negotiations for denuclearization in North Korea and the Korean Peninsula. And somehow a lot of us seem to have forgotten about the serious human rights violations in the country that has been put on the back burner. But the world is aware, I believe, of the serious human rights violations that go on in the country. And there has been some international advocacy efforts made to address the situation. Even the United Nations has done some work, a lot of work on reporting and publicizing the violations there. But the efforts have been relatively unnoticed, kind of overshadowed by the issues of denuclearization. So here at the Donia Human Rights Center, we wanted to cast a spotlight on the relatively forgotten issues of human rights in North Korea. And we were very fortunate to be able to assemble a wonderful panel of 3 speakers, and my job really is to get out of the way and let them speak to you about what's going on in North Korea, what the way forward might be, and so on. Okay. So the 3 speakers, we start with Jared Genser, who has been a great friend of the Donia Human Rights Center. He is our own. He's an alum of University of Michigan Law School, and currently the managing director of PreState Strategies, which is a public interest law firm. He has a long and distinguished career as an international human rights lawyer, representing a series of Nobel Peace Prize laureates, Liu Xiaobo, Desmond Tutu, Elie Wiesel, Aung San Suu Kyi, and Václav Havel also, as pro bono clients of his. And he's also taught a lot of university courses, law school courses, and he's the author of, I'll just say, his most recent book, coming out of Cambridge University Press soon, forthcoming this year, September, the UN Working Group on Arbitrary Detention, Commentary and Guide to Practice. Okay. He has published widely on the issues around international human rights, and especially the UN efforts in that regard. He has won a lot of awards, American Bar Association's International Human Rights Award, the Freedom Fighter Award from the organization Liberty in North Korea, LINK, and he has extensive knowledge about situations in North Korea, and he's going to share his knowledge with us today. So he will kind of set the scene for our discussion, and then we will move on to Mr. Kang Hwan, who has made all the way to this place from Seoul, South Korea, and he is the chairman of the board of directors of North Korea Strategy Center, and the founder of the center, North Korean Strategy Center in Seoul, South Korea. And he's a journalist, author, and perhaps most importantly for our purpose, the defector from North Korea. He was born in Pyongyang, North Korea in 1968. When he was 9. He and his entire family were imprisoned in the Yodok concentration camp by the government of dictator Kim Il-sung. And for 10 years, he and his family were subjected to the brutal conditions of the camp. And in 1992, he made the daring escape from North Korea and eventually immigrated to South Korea. In 2000, he published The Aquariums of Pyongyang, a description of his experiences and the very first survivor account of North Korea's concentration camps. So he has extensive, intimate knowledge and experience in about the situations in North Korea, and he will share that knowledge and experience with us today. The third, last but not least, is Dr. Katrina Lantos Swett, who is president of the Lantos Foundation for Human Rights and Justice, which was established in 2008 to honor and continue the legacy of her late father, late Congressman Tom Lantos, who I didn't know this until I read about this. Congressman Lantos was the only Holocaust survivor to serve in the U.S. Congress. Okay? And I did know about his commitment to promoting human rights in the world and all the excellent work that he did as a congressman for decades. And Dr. Katrina Lantos Swett has also worked extensively on promoting human rights in the world. And on North Korea in particular, she currently serves as co-chair of the board of the Committee for Human Rights in North Korea, HLNK, and the Budapest-based Tom Lantos Institute. And she has and is serving on many advisory boards. I'm not going to list all of them, but very impressive list of international human rights and social justice and leadership organizations and institutions. Okay, so we will go in that order, and I'm going to now give the stage to Jared Genser, and please join me in welcoming all these wonderful panelists.
Good afternoon, everyone. It's always great for me to be back here in Ann Arbor. First, thanks to Kiyo, the Donia Center, and their fabulous staff and faculty for having this panel. It's also great, of course, to be with both Hwan, who I've worked with over many years, and Katrina Lantos Swett, who is a good friend and collaborator on lots of fabulous human rights topics. I've got the challenging task in about 15 minutes to give you a thumbnail sketch of not only the situation of human rights in North Korea, but what has happened to try to address it in the last, about 20 years. So I'm going to jump into it, and this will be available. We can even put it on the website if you wanted to see later, but I'm going to go through a number of PowerPoint slides, hopefully not too fast, but time is limited. So let me start there. So we're going to talk today about the human rights and humanitarian challenges posed by North Korea, and you'll see here I'm going to talk about international efforts to address the situation. I'm going to talk about the doctrine of the responsibility to protect, the obligation of all states to prevent mass atrocity crimes and apply that doctrine to the situation in North Korea. I'll talk about global efforts to address North Korea's human rights challenges, including the UN Commission of Inquiry that was stood up in 2013 and published its report in 2014, and talk about where things stand as we speak right now. To date, basically, the overall conclusion is that efforts to address the human rights and humanitarian challenges in the DPRK have really had only limited success. There has been a ton of engagement, as you'll see, the Human Rights Council adopting resolutions, the UN General Assembly adopting resolutions. There has been a UN Special Rapporteur on human rights in North Korea going back to 2004. Now 3 of those special rapporteurs have published every year 2 20-page reports on different aspects of the human rights situation there. Given we're here in the United States has had a North Korean Human Rights Act and a special envoy on North Korean human rights. And around the world, there have been a whole range of other efforts undertaken. Japan, for example, as one illustration, has been especially active on the issue of abductions of foreign nationals, because there are very famously a number of Japanese foreign nationals that were abducted to North Korea. I got involved in the situation in North Korea going back to 2006 and was, on a pro bono basis, I was commissioned by Václav Havel, the former Czech Republic president, the former Prime Minister of Norway, Kjell Magne Bondevik, and Elie Wiesel, the Nobel Peace Laureate, to do the first ever comprehensive report on the human rights situation in North Korea. And it was intended to get beyond the reports that have been on different thematic areas, as well as the North Korea's human rights situation being overshadowed by the nuclear missile issues, to try to put it on a global stage. And so I was approached by these principals and was hired to represent them pro bono. We worked with Katrina's organization, the Committee for Human Rights in North Korea, to first look at what international law might apply to the situation there, looking at the responsibility to protect and what might be necessary to get the situation of North Korean human rights on the Security Council agenda. We applied those frameworks to the situation in North Korea, and ultimately resulted in this report that we published back in 2006 with an enormous pro bono team at my law firm at the time, which was about 140 pages and 1,000 footnotes, the first ever comprehensive look at the situation in North Korea, and applying for the first time ever the Crimes Against Humanity framework to the situation to explain why the situation constituted crimes against humanity and why the international community had an obligation under the doctrine of the responsibility to protect, as I'll explain, to engage and help the suffering people of North Korea. So let me just talk briefly about the responsibility to protect. In short, historically, the doctrine of state sovereignty was viewed as a means to block international engagement with domestic human rights situations in individual countries. And after the failures, particularly of Rwanda and Srebrenica and the genocides that took place there, that understanding of sovereignty evolved and ultimately resulted in 2005 in the UN General Assembly adopting the responsibility to protect doctrine. The doctrine itself, you can just see a quick summary of it on the left side, which says, we, the international community, are prepared to take collective action in a timely and decisive manner if national authorities are manifestly failing to protect their populations from genocide, war crimes, ethnic cleansing, and crimes against humanity. That engages the entire UN system, the totality of the UN system, up to potential engagement by the UN Security Council, which has even the ability to authorize the use of force. You can see, as the last bullet point on the right, that there have been Security Council interventions under R2P in Libya, Mali, and Cote d'Ivoire, but the Council has also been stymied from intervening in places like Syria, Burma, and other places. In the case of the DPRK, our focus was on the active commission of crimes against humanity. Very briefly, what are crimes against humanity? It's a complicated area of international law. Nonetheless, the best way that you could describe it is to say it's the commission of what you might ordinarily think of otherwise domestic crimes committed in a particular way. And what I mean by that is think about crimes of murder, extermination, enslavement, deportation, imprisonment, torture. These are things that can happen domestically. Somebody can commit a murder. Obviously a violation of domestic law. For a series of murders to constitute crimes against humanity, the way in which it has to take place is there has to be an attack by a government or non-governmental actor. What is being done has to be part of that attack. It has to be directed against the civilian population. The attack must be widespread or systematic, and those involved must know that they are part of a pattern or widespread practice of the commission of these crimes. So that is, I basically just summarized thousands and thousands of pages of understanding crimes against humanity into one PowerPoint slide. If you don't entirely understand it, my apologies, but time is limited. So there were two sets of policies the DPRK was engaged in back then. There was also the third of abductions that, in my view, met these criteria. With respect to food policy and famine, in essence, the DPRK redirected funds that it was receiving even during its famine in the 1990s that killed more than 1 million people. It was redirecting those monies to nuclear and weapons programs. That was directly, as a policy choice, resulting in the deaths of more than 1 million people. In addition, the DPRK strictly controls food distribution and distributes it on the basis of where people fall in the Songbyeong system, which is a rating system of the government from that goes on a very long scale with 40 or 50 ratings from strongly opposed to the regime to strongly supporting the regime. Those in Pyongyang are the most privileged, and the further you get from Pyongyang, the less resources that you are entitled to. You can see here that some of the surveys have suggested that 37% of children under 6 are chronically malnourished. The DPRK has also limited access to the WFP and various NGOs. Literally in the last 50, 60 years, the height of the average North Korean has shrunk by 1 foot compared to the average South Korean. I mean, that is an astonishing figure. In fact, they had to reduce the height limit for the North Korean military to 5 feet tall as a minimum from like 5'5" because of the shrinking population. And a lot of the coping strategies of starving people, including being able to go to other areas to gather food or being able to buy and sell food or procure food across the border in China and bring it back, have been criminalized. In addition, and Kang will speak about this dramatically more effective than me, is the Gulag system. The numbers have ebbed and flowed. Right now, it's estimated about 120,000 people are in a vast network of prison camps. More than 400,000 are estimated to have died. Those who get sent to the camps are real or imagined opponents of the regime. And when you're sent to the Gulag, as Kang Hwan can talk about, again, much more compellingly than me, you aren't just sent, but according to what Kim Il-sung said many decades ago, you have to root out multiple generations of opposition to the regime. So if you get sent there for some arbitrary reason, your parents are sent and your children are sent, not just you. And prisoners are provided starvation-level rations and forced to engage in physically demanding labor, widespread torture. So again, I'm going to go through this very, very quickly, but in essence, you can see here that these are the crimes in the first column that relate to the two sets of policies I'm talking about. Under international law, the crime of extermination includes inflicting conditions of life, which include the denial of food that causes great suffering or death. And there's also a catch-all crime against humanity of other inhumane acts causing great suffering or serious injury to body or to mental or physical health. And then you'll see the elements that are present on the right. In the Gulag system, you have the crimes of imprisonment, persecution, enslavement, extermination, and torture. Again, also crimes against humanity. Subsequent to this report being published in 2006, in 2011, there was an international group that was put together, the International Coalition to Stop Crimes Against Humanity in North Korea. And I had been involved in a lot of advocacy in the intervening 5 years. We actually put out a second report for my law firm in 2008, updating the situation in North Korea. But this coalition was the first to come together around a common objective, which was to create a UN Commission of Inquiry into mass atrocity crimes. Our report and other reports by NGOs had done a very strong job, in all modesty, documenting what was happening based on, as best we understood it, and applying international law to it. But that's one thing for an NGO report or a civil society report to be published. But we needed the international system to understand the enormity of the crisis in North Korea and to start to take action. And so these are the steps that roughly led to the commission of the UN Commission of Inquiry back in 2013. I was pro bono counsel to the International Coalition to Stop Crimes Against Humanity in North Korea. And we called for the creation of a commission of inquiry. I also filed an individual case on a number of survivors of the Gulag about their family members left behind. The UN put out a written opinion on one of those cases that we filed at the UN, talking about how the detention in one of these camps was arbitrary and in violation of international law. I had met privately with Navi Pillay in mid-2012 and told her that she needed to work on North Korea. At the time, the office was doing basically nothing. The Office of the High Commissioner was doing very little. And I raised for the first time to her directly the idea of a commission of inquiry, which she, well, off the record, probably wasn't as supportive of as I would have hoped, although was willing to hear more. And ultimately, as you'll see, she later then came out, and in fact, in January of 2013, with some advocacy efforts from a lot of different people, called for the creation of that commission of inquiry. In fact, Kang Hwan and I traveled the world to multiple capitals to lobby for the creation of the Commission of Inquiry. He and I don't even remember all the places we went to. We went to Seoul, to London, to Paris, to Geneva, and we were in numerous meetings with various UN officials, foreign governments, urging them to take this on and to advocate in the Human Rights Council for a Commission of Inquiry. I can assure you his personal story is a lot more compelling than me as a lawyer speaking at a high level about the situation, and he's an incredibly compelling advocate, really one of the most famous and highly regarded advocates for North Korean human rights and his people in the world. And ultimately, the Human Rights Council created its report in 2013. It established a commission of inquiry with 3 members. Justice Michael Kirby, the former Supreme Court Justice of Australia, chaired the commission. And the commission did an amazing amount of work over 1 year, holding hearings in multiple capitals, interviewing more than 200 witnesses, both those that were willing to be reported publicly and those that they met with privately for security reasons. They reviewed all the materials that had ever been published, and they held hearings all over the world. I personally testified before the Commission of Inquiry in Washington when it appeared and testified about crimes against humanity and the responsibility to protect. And this is, again, this is in one PowerPoint slide summarizing a 400-page report published by the UN. These are some of the most salient quotes. The gravity, scale, and nature of these violations reveal a state that does not have any parallel in the contemporary world. Systematic, widespread, and gross human rights violations have been and are being committed by the DPRK, its institutions and officials. In many cases, the violations of human rights found by the Commission constitute crimes against humanity. The international community must accept its responsibility to protect the people of the DPRK from crimes against humanity, and they called on the Security Council itself to refer the situation to the International Criminal Court for action and impose targeted sanctions against those most responsible. It was a bombshell of a report, and the fact that it was a UN report rather than an NGO report gave it much, much greater weight and resonance. It was incredibly, incredibly important, and Justice Kirby and his fellow commissioners deserve enormous credit for the extraordinary amount of work that they undertook. Ultimately, in December of 2017, not so long ago, it took several years after the Commission of Inquiry called for the Security Council to take up the situation, there was a vote of 10 to 3 to 2, 10 yes, 3 no, and 2 abstentions, to add the humanitarian situation in North Korea onto the permanent agenda of the Security Council. The Security Council was then briefed at that time by the Assistant Secretary General for Political Affairs and the UN High Commissioner for Human Rights. Putting something on the agenda of the Council is not subject to the P5 veto, the permanent 5-member veto. Only substantive actions can be vetoed. So China couldn't block this being placed on the permanent agenda of the Security Council. Unfortunately, of course, because of China and Russia, both of those countries do not believe the situation, the human rights situation in North Korea should be on the agenda of the Council, and therefore they have prevented any substantive action being undertaken by the Security Council, really of any kind. So while the Council is occasionally being briefed about the situation, it has taken no action. So where does that leave us today? We are in a very difficult situation. This is a quick summary of our situation. Kang Hwan especially, who has lived through this and published the first compelling narrative and really the most compelling narrative of life in the North Korean Gulag, published his book in the year 2000. We're almost 20 years after his extraordinary book revealed to the world what life is actually like for a North Korean in the Gulag system and the horrors of life in the Gulag system. And really, while we've done a lot of report writing and public statement issuing and condemnations and urgent appeals, really nothing has had a major effect on the situation on the ground in North Korea. At best, we've sent signals to second and third tier leaders that the international community is watching. But Kim Jong-un, of course, has taken over from his father, Kim Jong-il, as the president of North Korea. For the first several years, he was there. He, of course, was launching missiles and testing nuclear weapons and doing so with great fervor. And that has, of course, as has always been the case, and there's a lot of complexity with the relationship of South Korea with North Korea, but different governments in South Korea, depending on their orientation, have also been, in my view, complicit in de-emphasizing the human rights situation in North Korea, and with the idea of somehow engagement for the purposes of, integration, reintegration, and reunification. Most famously, of course, the former president of South Korea, who won the Nobel Prize for a summit that led to a sum total of nothing. In recent years, the world's focus has really been exclusively on North Korea's nuclear and missile programs. You may recall, or some of you may recall, that in his State of the Union address in January of 2018, in a very positive move as I saw it, President Trump highlighted the story of the heroic North Korean defector Ji Song-ho, talking about his escape from North Korea after his legs were run over, and his own surviving of the situation there, and Ji Song-ho, who speaks about his life in North Korea in a very compelling way, held up his his handmade crutches that he used to escape from North Korea at that event. And for a brief moment, I actually thought, maybe hope against hope, that President Trump was actually going to start to do something about North Korean human rights. Because the reality is, while President Obama had a special envoy on North Korean human rights who worked very, very hard, the security establishment in the United States, at the Defense Department, the intelligence agencies, and beyond, really made the ability to engage on North Korean human rights much more limited than you would hope for or expect from the Obama administration. Unfortunately, since that State of the Union address, as we all have heard much of, President Trump, held his summit with Kim Jong-un, talking about how he's honored to meet him, that he's a talented guy who loves his country, This is one of the sort of most profound quotes. I was being really tough, and so was he, and we would go back and forth, and then we fell in love. No, really. He wrote me beautiful letters. They were great letters, and then we fell in love. And in my view, these comments have had the effect of whitewashing North Korea's human rights record from public visibility after that first moment where he highlighted it in a really dramatic and really helpful way. And as has always been the case when there's international engagement in North Korea on the security side of the equation, nuclear and missile, the world steps back and decides to remove pressure on human rights for fear that it might interfere with a dialogue on North Korean missile and nuclear programs. To conclude, I would say that my view is that dialogue is likely to go nowhere. And I think that the idea that President Trump has put forward that somehow they're going to unilaterally disarm their nuclear weapons is not even slightly realistic. When Kim Jong-un has seen what has happened when leaders like Muammar Gaddafi or Saddam Hussein, or others have given up their stockpile of nuclear weapons or weapons of mass destruction, and what has happened to them. And why would Kim Jong-un ever agree to denuclearize? And the sad reality is that nonetheless, the world has stepped back and said, well, we'll see what happens with President Trump and this engagement with Kim Jong-un. And in the meantime, the people of North Korea, as has always been the case, continue to suffer enormously. At the end of the day, as I say here at the end, we cannot relent in our efforts to address the atrocities of the North Korean regime. The suffering of the North Korean people is profound, and it has to be a humanitarian imperative to obtain access to and feed its starving people, let alone to get the Gulag shut down and obtain justice and accountability for the perpetrators. This is clearly a frozen conflict in the world and not one that's likely to be resolved anytime soon. But it's great that you are all here today to hear about what is actually happening in North Korea that actually affects the North Korean people. I can assure you it is not the nuclear and missile programs that affect the North Korean people, except in negative ways in relation to all of the money being diverted over so many years from the feeding of the population of North Korea into the so-called defense of North Korea. So thank you very much.
먼저 이 뜻깊은 곳에 저를 초청해 주신 여러분께 감사를 드립니다.
Thank you very much for inviting me to this very prestigious panel.
그리고 이제 북한 인권 문제를 위해서 노력해 주신 우리 캔서 변호사님을 비롯해서 많은 분들께 감사를 드립니다.
And thank you, Mr. Jared Genser and everyone for taking so much interest in North Korean humanitarian issues.
저는 이제 북한에서 그 히틀러의 나치 수용소와 또 스탈린의 시베리아 수용소를 이제 합쳐놓은 것 같은 그런 수용소에서 약 한 10년간 그 수감 생활을 했었고 그 이후에 이제 전 세계에 북한의 인권 문제를 알려왔고 현재까지 북한 인권 운동을 하고 있습니다.
I have spent 10 years in the North Korean concentration camps, which can be compared to the Nazi and Stalin concentration camps combined. And I have escaped North Korea and since then have worked to promote the issues of North Korean human rights to the world.
그 악명 높은 수용소들은 이제 아주 짧게 그 수명을 다했습니다. 히틀러의 나치 수용소는 그 연합군에 의해서 이제 독일군이 붕괴되면서 그 수용소가 이제 드러나게 됐고, 스탈린의 시베리아 수용소 군도도 공산 정권은 바뀌지 않았지만 내부 개혁에 의해서 수용소가 이제 폐쇄가 됐습니다.
The concentration camps that I've mentioned had a short lifespan, such as the concentration camp by Hitler was collapsed with the defeat of Germany, and Stalin through the reformations.
그 인류 역사에서 그런 나치 수용소와 같은 그런 이제 강제 수용소가 거의 50년 이상 유지된 전례가 없다고 생각을 합니다.
In our history, I don't think there's ever been a case where a concentration camp has been sustained for more than 50 years.
많은 여러 가지 요인이 있겠지만 북한 정권은 정말 특이하게도 장기간 지금 집권하고 있고 오늘 이 순간에도 지금 그 정권 연장을 위해서 최후의 어떤 발악을 다하고 있는 것 같습니다.
For various reasons, North Korea is unique that it's been sustaining its regime for such a long time, and even to this day, its leadership is doing everything it can to prolong their leadership.
그 김일성, 김정일, 이제 김정은 3대 세습을 이어면서 저는 이제 최근에 발생하고 있는 이제 김정은 정권의 인권 유린 실태를 좀 여러분께 말씀을 드리고자 합니다.
I would like to share with you the humanitarian issues in North Korea that has prevailed over the 3 generations of the Kim regime in North Korea.
그 할아버지 김일성, 아버지 김정일에 비해서 김정은은 이제 저기 유럽에서 이제 공부를 했기 때문에 자기 아버지보다는 조금 이제 인권 문제나 또 이제 사회적인 개방 문제를 비롯해 가지고 북한 사회를 긍정적으로 변화시키지 않겠냐 하는 이제 그런 기대감은 초창기에 있었습니다.
Compared to his grandfather Kim Il-sung and father Kim Jong-il, there was hope that since Kim Jong-un had studied abroad in Europe, he would take more interest in human rights issues and the economic reforms of North Korea.
하지만 이제 사람들의 예상과는 달리 김정은이 저지르고 있는 그 반인륜 범죄는 자기 할아버지 아버지가 수십 년간 했던 것을 이 사람은 지금 7년 안에 그 사람을 죽이는 숫자라든지 그 북한 내부의 공포스러운 어떤 그런 환경을 만들어내고 있습니다.
But unfortunately, what his grandfather and father did over the tens of years, he has achieved within the short span of 7 years to execute more people than ever.
특히 가장 최근에 북한 정권 내부의 저희가 정보들을 수집해 본 결과 김정은을 이제 경호하는 이 경호부대의 최고 사령관을 이제 공개 처형했다는 저희가 정보를 입수했습니다.
And just recently, we've received information that he even publicly executed his top guard, escort.
그러니까 자기를 지키는 경호부대 책임자를 처형한다는 것은 김정은 정권이 거의 막다른 골목으로 지금 몰려가고 있다는 그런 증거가 되는 것 같습니다.
I think this shows evidence that the Kim regime is now at the extreme end.
그 90년대 중반에 이제 김정일 정권 때 한번 붕괴 직전까지 갔었고 사실상 이제 한국 정부가 개입하지 않았으면 그 당시 북한 정권은 사실은 완전한 붕괴로 갔거나 중국식의 개혁 개방으로 갔다고 생각을 하고 있습니다.
It already almost faced collapse in the mid-1990s, and if South Korea had not helped out North Korea at the time, it probably would have collapsed or went through an economic reform like that of China.
지금 이제 과거에 겪었던 그 김정일 시대의 붕괴 상황과 지금 김정은 정권의 붕괴 상황이 유사한 측면들이 있습니다.
I think there are a lot of similarities in the situation now compared to the mid-1990s.
과거와 다른 거는 김정일 때에는 이제 북한 내부의 주민들이 외부의 정보에 차단돼 있었기 때문에 잘 몰랐습니다. 근데 지금은 이제 많이 바뀌고 있다는 점이죠.
The biggest difference is at that time, the North Korean people had no access whatsoever of outside information.
또 한 가지는 이제 그 경제적인 문제에서 물론 이게 그 김정은이 핵실험하고 미사일 발사를 하면서 유엔 제재가 지금 김정은 정권의 완전한 그 파괴적인 어떤 그런 경제적인 붕괴를 가져오고 있는데 이런 유엔 제재 때문에 지금 북한 정권이 거의 붕괴 직전에 몰려 있습니다.
And also the UN economic sanction that was imposed on North Korea is also contributing to the near collapse situation in North Korea.
그러니까 이런 김정은의 잘못된 판단 때문에 북한 경제가 붕괴됐고 이 돈이 없기 때문에 북한 내부에서는 이제 권력 투쟁이 계속 일어나고 있는데 지금 김정은 정권 들어와 가지고 엄청나게 많은 사건들이 발생하고 있습니다.
And because there is no money, there has been a lot of fight for power within North Korea, and a lot of changes are happening within the government.
저희 단체에서 이제 지난 7년간 김정은이 학살한 북한의 노동당 간부들 저희가 조사를 해봤는데 저희가 이름이 확인된 사람만 421명이 됩니다. 그 우리가 이제 언론에 공개됐거나 알만한 사람들 가운데 한 421명의 처형자를 저희가 조사했습니다.
Our organization has been researching how many people have been purged and executed, and we were able to name 421 people.
현재 제가 보여주고 있는 사진들은 이제 김정은이 죽인 노동당 간부들 리스트인데요.
The pictures that you see now are the pictures of some of the government leaders that have been persecuted, executed.
2012년도에 이제 리영호라고 하는 북한의 인민군 총참모부 참모장을 이제 김정은이 공개 처형을 했습니다.
In 2012, Lee Yong-ho, who is the North Korean People's Army Chief of Staff, has been executed.
이 사람을 죽이면서 그 수백 명의 북한 인민군 장군들을 죽였는데 북한 인민군대에서는 이런 말이 있다고 합니다. 김정은이가 미국의 CIA 간첩이 아니냐? 응? 전쟁도 아닌 평화 시기에 왜 이렇게 많은 군 장군들을 죽이냐? 그런 소문까지 돌았다고 합니다.
When Lee Yong-ho was executed, hundreds of people were executed with him, and they were saying going around in North Korea that Kim Jong-un may be the spy of the United States. Why else would he be killing so many people when it's not even during a war?
여러분도 아시겠지만 이제 김정은의 고모부였죠. 이 장성택을 이제 처형을 하면서 약 한 2만 명의 그 간부들을 이제 죽이거나 정치범 수용소로 보내는 이제 큰 사건이 발생했습니다.
And as you know, he also executed his uncle Jang Song-taek, and with him 20,000 people were executed together or sent to the prison camp.
그 원래 북한에서 사람을 죽일 때 이제 처형하는 방식이 있습니다. 그러니까 이제 AK 소총을 가진 인민군 3명이 나와서 그 사형수에게 이제 그 머리, 가슴, 다리를 이제 그 3발씩 9발을 쏴서 사람을 죽이는 게 이제 북한의 공개 처형 방식인데 그 장성택을 죽일 때 아주 특이한 방식으로 사람을 죽였다고 합니다. 그러니까 이제 비행기를 쏘는 고사기관총을 걸어놓고 1000발을 쏴서 이제 시체를 완전히 없애버리는 방식으로 처음으로 이제 공개 처형을 시도했다고 합니다.
When during public executions in North Korea, what usually happens is they will shoot 9 bullets in the heads, the chest, and the legs. But when Jang Song-taek was killed, it was in a different manner. He was shot 1,000 times, so that his entire body was disappeared.
장성택 사건과 관련돼서 이제 많은 간부들을 처형을 했고 이 여자는 이제 김정일의 몇 번째 부인인지 잘 모르겠지만 어쨌든 마지막 부인입니다. 이 여자가. 근데 이제 김정은이 이제 자기 아버지의 마지막 부인까지 이제 처형했다는 그런 정보들 저희가 입수했습니다.
So this picture shows this woman who is probably the last wife of Kim Jong-il. So he even killed his father's wife.
그리고 이제 바로 김정일의 고모죠, 고모. 이 고모 역시 지금 그 수년째 안 나오고 있는데 저희가 북한 내부에서 확인해 본 결과 이 고모 역시 이제 김정은에 의해서 거의 암살된 것으로 저희가 추정을 하고 있습니다.
And Kim Kyung-hee, who is Kim Jong-un's aunt, was also assassinated.
이 김정은이 죽인 이제 북한의 유명한 장군들의 어떤 모습입니다.
These are also director generals of the regime that Kim Jong-un has killed.
그 특이한 점은 2012년도 경에 그 운하수 악단이라고 하는 이제 김정은의 개인 악단에 있는 단원들을 이제 11명을 죽인 사건이 있었는데 이 사건은 이제 김정은의 부인이 원래 그 악단의 배우였습니다. 그래서 그 자기 부인의 이걸 감추기 위해서 이제 11명을 처형했는데 고사기관총으로 처형하고 나서 그 시체들 위로 장갑차로 이제 그 시체를 다 깔아뭉개는 이제 그런 식으로 처형했다는 저희가 증언을 이제 확보를 했습니다.
And also in 2012, he executed 11 members of the Unhasu band. His wife was an actress of the Unhasu band, and it is said that he killed these 11 people because he wanted to keep matters about his wife secret.
자기 형인 이제 김정남을 이제 말레이시아에서 처형을 했죠.
And as you know, he also killed his brother Kim Jong-nam in Malaysia.
그리고 이제 그 옆에 있는 사람이 북한의 이제 국가안전보위부라고 하는 이제 북한판 CIA죠. 이 국가안전보위부의 이제 김원홍을 비롯한 최고 핵심 간부들을 무더기로 처형한 사건이 2017년도에 발생했습니다.
And also in 2007, he executed Kim Won-hong, who is like a North Korean CIA.
북한 정권이 생긴 이래 그 국가안전보위부의 최고위직 간부들을 한꺼번에 죽인 전례가 없다고 합니다. 그러니까 이건 이제 뭐냐면 그 국가안전보위부 최고위 간부들이 김정은을 견제할 만큼 이제 세력화돼 있다 보니까 이걸 한두 명 죽여가지고는 안 되겠다 해가지고 이제 한 50명을 이제 한꺼번에 학살을 했는데 이 사건을 계기로 이제 북한 정권을 통제하는 통제력이 상당히 약화되고 있다는 이제 내부 정보들 저희가 입수하고 있습니다.
So as you can see, he has executed a lot of high-profile leaders, and we think that this proves the fact that Kim Jong-un is at a brink of crisis.
이거 잘못 잠깐만요. 제가 참. 그리고 이제 가장 최근에 이제 북한의 인민군 총정치국이라고 하는 핵심 간부들을 이제 또 처형한 사건이 발생했는데 이 사건은 이제 김정은 정권을 둘러싸고 있는 국가안전보위성 인민군 총정치국이라고 하는 핵심 이 군부 세력을 이제 그 집단 숙청하면서 김정은 정권의 내구성이 상당히 취약해지고 있다는 내부의 어떤 저희들이 정보들을 저희가 또 취득을 했습니다.
So he's been executing and purging a lot of high-ranking officials in the military as well, which shows the position of Kim Jong-un in North Korea right now.
그리고 이제 제가 서두에 말씀했다시피 김정은을 경호하는 이제 허위사령관을 처형을 하면서 지금 김정은 정권 내부는 그를 둘러싸고 있는 핵심 간부들을 계속 처형하다 보니까 이제는 더 이상 그 김정은을 믿고 미래도 갈 수 없다는 이제 그런 간부들의 인식이 팽배해지고 있습니다.
So since he's been executing so many high-ranking officials and leaders, there is now no more trust within the regime.
그 지금 김정은이 트럼프를 대통령 만나가지고 유엔 제재를 풀기 위한 아주 최후의 거짓말을 지금 준비하고 있습니다.
So that's why Kim Jong-un is meeting up with President Trump. He is doing all he can do to lift the UN sanction.
만약 트럼프 대통령이 북한의 인권 문제를 거론하고 북한의 경제 제재를 푸는 문제를 북한의 비핵화를 완전하게 실행하는 조건으로 김정은의 어떤 요구에 응하지 않는다면 아마 1년 안에 북한의 김정은 정권은 붕괴될 가능성이 높습니다.
If President Trump, addresses the issue of human rights in exchange for denuclearization, there is high chance that North Korea will collapse within the next 1 year.
근데 지금 분위기로 봐서는 트럼프 대통령이 김정은에게 속아 넘어갈 가능성이 매우 높아 보입니다.
But unfortunately, it looks like there is high chance that Trump will again fall for the lies of Kim Jong-un.
그 나치 히틀러를 보고 내가 그를 사랑한다. 나는 그와 잘 통하고 있다. 너 말과 똑같은 말입니다. 김정은을 사랑한다느니 뭐 김정은과 대화가 된다느니 이런 말을 하는 사람들은 제가 보건대는 제정신이 아니다. 저는 생각을 하고 있습니다.
When he said about Kim Jong-un that they might even fall in love with each other, it's like saying he loves Hitler. This is not something that an ordinary person can say.
그 북한 정권을 뭐 보장하겠다. 핵만 없애게 되면 북한 정권을 보장해주겠다. 뭐 북한을 인정하겠다. 이런 말을 사실은 트럼프나 한국의 문재인 대통령 같은 사람들이 할 권리가 없습니다. 이런 권리는 북한 주민에게 있는 것이죠. 북한 주민들은 북한 정권의 붕괴를 원하고 있는데 지금 외부에 쓸데없는 사람들이 지금 김정은 정권의 유지를 도와주려고 하고 있고 북한 주민들에게 무한한 고통을 또 주려고 하고 있습니다. 정말 심각한 문제죠.
President Trump and also the South Korean president have no right to say that they will protect the North Korean government in exchange for denuclearization. This right should be given to the North Korean people. It is the North Korean people that are suffering most from the human rights issues in North Korea.
그래서 앞으로 북한 인권 문제가 전 세계로 확산돼서 북한 문제가 바로 풀릴 수 있도록 함께 노력하시기 바랍니다. 감사합니다.
So I hope that the North Korean issue will be globalized and the whole world can work together to solve this issue. Thank you.
Good afternoon. I'm Dr. Katrina Lantos Swett, and I really am very honored to be here with you today and feel actually quite humbled to be on a panel with such extraordinarily knowledgeable and really powerful and compelling colleagues to address this very serious issue. And I'm a little speechless myself after the presentation we just heard, trying to wrap my own mind around the sheer level of terror that exists in North Korea right now. This description, this listing of those, not the poor, persecuted nobodies of North Korea, the 120,000 people currently incarcerated in gulags, for no reason other than paranoia, but this list of the closest, most intimate movers and shakers in this regime. It is, as I say, a pretty stunning and terrifying window into the terror that they live in, but let's be honest, also the sheer terror of Kim Jong-un, because no one who feels secure in his position, who feels he can rely on the loyalty and the devotion of his team behaves in this way. So, I thank you both for really incredibly enlightening and powerful presentations. I have to say a quick word before I get into my presentation, and that is how special it is for me to be at the University of Michigan. As was mentioned, my late father was a Holocaust survivor. In fact, the only Holocaust survivor ever elected to serve in the United States Congress. And he and my mother, also a Hungarian Holocaust survivor, were both saved under different circumstances, but were both saved by the greatest hero of that dark time in human history, the Swedish humanitarian and diplomat Raoul Wallenberg, who came to Budapest in what really were the last and most horrifying days of the Holocaust for the Jews of Hungary, with one mission, which was to try and save as many innocent lives as possible. The Jewish population in the Hungarian countryside had almost all at this point been deported to their deaths, but there remained a somewhat intact population in Budapest, and he went there with this one mission in mind. And today I'm not here to talk about Wallenberg, although it's a subject very near and dear to my heart. But the reason I bring Wallenberg up, and I should say that he is credited by some with saving as many as 100,000 innocent lives through his extraordinary efforts, which should be an inspiration to us all as we try to think what we can do to try and save lives in North Korea. But long before he became the great hero of the Second World War, the great humanitarian that he was a student at the University of Michigan studying architecture. As a young man, he was the scion of one of Sweden's most powerful families. The Wallenbergs were really like the Rockefellers of Sweden. But he was sent here to Michigan to study architecture. And I've never seen it myself, but I understand that somewhere on campus there is a statue or a plaque to Raoul Wallenberg. And I know there's an annual Wallenberg lecture here at the University of Michigan. So for those of you who are part of this incredible academic and social community here at this world-class university, I'd like to give you, if I may, a little assignment, which is before you leave the University of Michigan, before you go on to whatever lies ahead of you, that you'll find out where that statue is, that you'll make a pilgrimage, because he is one of the great figures of our recent history. And to anyone with any interest in the cause of human rights, whether in North Korea or anywhere in the world, he is an inspiration. So I hope that that's something you'll do. Now, this event today could not really be more timely because in just 1 week, as we all know, President Trump and Kim Jong-un are scheduled to have their second summit, this time in Vietnam. And as we pause to consider what has happened over the past year in U.S. policy regarding human rights in North Korea, we are left shaking our head and saying, wow, what a difference a year can make, and not in a good way. Approximately 1 year ago, President Trump was delivering his first State of the Union address. And it was actually quite remarkable how much of that speech, how much of that first State of the Union address, a very well-received speech, by the way, was devoted to North Korea, and in particular to the tragic state of human rights in the DPRK. In that speech, just barely a year ago, the president said, and I'm quoting here, "No regime has oppressed its own citizens more totally or brutally than the cruel dictatorship in North Korea." And he made the case at that time that it was precisely the depraved character of the North Korean regime that made it an even greater threat on the matter of nuclear threats. To underscore and to add powerful emotional impact to his condemnation of Kim's regime and its abuses, the president had invited the parents of Otto Warmbier, the young American college student who had been arrested for taking down a propaganda poster on a school-sponsored trip to North Korea, and was ultimately returned to this country in a comatose state just days before he passed away. He had invited this young man's parents, and as Jared mentioned earlier, the heroic North Korean defector Ji Song-ho. They were there as guests in the First Lady's box. And when Ji Song-ho raised the crutches he used when escaping North Korea, crutches he needed after having lost his leg trying to scavenge coal from a train in order to help feed his starving family, the entire Congress erupted in applause and rose as one in an ovation. And I have to say, although I was watching on that occasion, not from the gallery in the House, but at home, I rose too, because it was a really powerful moment. And as somebody who has been engaged on behalf of the cause of human rights in North Korea, it was a pretty thrilling moment that a president of the United States should highlight as the most compelling and memorable moment in his State of the Union this symbol of the horrific abuses of that regime. And in fact, even before the State of the Union address, President Trump, and I want to be really, I should maybe give a disclaimer here. I'm a lifelong Democrat. My father was a Democratic member of Congress. My husband served in Congress as a Democrat. You know, that's where I'm coming from sort of politically. So some of the things I'm going to say, I felt surprised at the time as I was thinking these things. So before the State of the Union, I think it would be fair to say that President Trump had been refreshingly tough and outspoken, if more than a little unorthodox, vis-a-vis the North Korean regime. In November of 2017, he gave a powerful and uncompromising speech to the South Korean National Assembly. And those of us in the advocacy community found a lot to agree with in the president's remarks. Mr. Trump vividly described the terror of life in North Korea and contrasted it with the promise of life in the South. In his own words, and I'm quoting again, he said, "On this peninsula, we have watched the results of a tragic experiment in a laboratory of history. It is a tale of one people, but two Koreas. One Korea in which people took control of their lives and their country and chose a future of freedom and justice, of civilization and incredible achievement. And another Korea in which leaders imprisoned their people under the banner of tyranny, fascism, and oppression. The results of this experiment are in, and they are totally conclusive." Another way in which President Trump, at that time, was breaking with the norms of his predecessors was that he seemed perfectly willing, maybe even eager, to out-crazy the North Korean regime. Now, in retrospect, I think maybe that's just a natural default for the president, you know, the sort of crazy default. But a lot of people were talking about the fact that this was a strategy with some potential. We had all watched for decades as the erratic and crazy, flat-out crazy behavior of the North Koreans had seemed in some way to work to their advantage in dealings on the international stage. And, you know, if you think about it, it's a dynamic I think many of us are familiar with. I don't know if you have a crazy person in your life or a crazy person in your family. But if you do, or if you've ever sort of been in that kind of dynamic, you know there's a weird way in which they hold more cards than you do. Because the very craziness means they're willing to cross lines and do things that rational, normal, responsible people wouldn't do. And it's terribly unfair and kind of counterintuitive, but there is a truth to the fact that crazy sometimes holds more cards than rational. You know, and here we had a president who, as I say, seemed perfectly ready to go all in on crazy in his engagement with Kim Jong-un. Every time Kim Jong-un said something ridiculous and provocative, Trump's response seemed to be, "I'll meet you and I'll raise you." Their combustible exchanges included name-calling, of course, Little Rocket Man versus the Dotard. I actually felt just the tiniest shred of gratitude to Kim for actually reintroducing a whole new generation of people to the word dotard, because you had all sorts of people saying, dotard? What the heck is a dotard? I knew, but most people didn't. There were, of course, the threats. On the one hand, all-out war and thousand-fold revenge versus our own president's very famous fire and fury like the world has never seen. And then, of course, there were the awkward comparisons of the size of their respective nuclear buttons. It was a nerve-wracking and risky game of chicken that the two leaders seemed to be playing. But when President Trump and Chairman Kim agreed to hold a summit in Singapore in June of 2018, it seemed that a breakthrough on nuclear disarmament and perhaps human rights might be within reach. Sadly, of course, we now know that in the months since the Singapore summit, the concrete results on denuclearization have been a great disappointment. But the Trump administration's silence, abject silence on North Korea's ongoing human rights crisis has been even more disillusioning. Mr. Trump, and again, Jared referenced this earlier, has gone from excoriating the cruelty of the Kim regime to praising the beautiful letters he received from the North Korean leader. And it seems clear that Kim's stature and credibility on the world stage has been enhanced, even as US intelligence suggests that the North Koreans have not in any meaningful way stopped their nuclear program. So where does this all leave the North Korea human rights agenda? And what are we to conclude about the Trump administration's policies? A first conclusion is that this administration has one absolutely overriding concern when it comes to North Korea, namely denuclearization. And human rights are such a distant second on their agenda as to have become almost completely invisible. The early outspokenness of the Trump administration regarding human rights abuses seems to have been nothing more than a useful part of a broader strategy of ramping up pressure on the DPRK. But now that a direct relationship between Trump and Kim has been established, there is very little appetite to risk upsetting the apple cart by speaking out against the innumerable ongoing atrocities. I suppose, with the benefit of hindsight, none of this should come as a big surprise. As a candidate, Mr. Trump was very clear that he saw himself first and foremost as a deal maker. And the only deal he really cares about with North Korea relates to their nuclear program. Don't get me wrong. We all agree that denuclearization of the Korean peninsula is hugely important. But, and this is a really key point that I want to make, a purely transactional approach to American foreign policy, one that downplays or sets aside our commitment to fundamental values and principles, is a foreign policy that will ultimately fail to protect our security and to uphold our values. And that, I think, is at the heart of the failure of this administration's policies, not only vis-a-vis North Korea, but I think we could point to a number of other contexts as well. If you view every matter in relations with other countries as simply a transactional deal, what's the deal? What can I get out of it for myself? You know, where is the profit? I mean, I think we saw another illustration of this unhealthily transactional mentality in the Trump administration's response to the murder of the Saudi journalist Khashoggi. The president basically came out and said, hey, we've got hundreds of millions of dollars of potential arms deals in the offing with Saudi Arabia. So what are you going to do? And it's a terrible betrayal, in my view, of our values and our principles. Just a few weeks ago, I published an op-ed on the website Real Clear World. This was before the State of the Union, in which I called on President Trump to follow the example of another Republican, Ronald Reagan, who took a powerful, muscular stance when it came to U.S. security. But he also took historic steps to institutionalize human rights as a central component of U.S. foreign policy. President Reagan understood that a regime that is willing to repress its citizens at home is also far more likely to engage in aggression abroad. And this is a lesson we dare not forget when it comes to North Korea. So what are the prospects for progress on human rights in North Korea, given this administration's current posture? One strategy that I think is worth considering and thinking about is to leverage the upcoming 2020 campaign to try and again raise the profile of human rights. The advocacy community should reach out to the large and rapidly growing field of Democratic candidates to urge them to hold the Trump administration to account for its seeming embrace of the brutal dictator Kim. And let me tell you, if there's anything Democrats are eager to do, it's hold President Trump's feet to the fire. And this is a situation where he has absolutely set it up for these candidates to do that, and to do that with real legitimacy and with real fire. It would be great, in my view, if the advocacy community could reach out to each and every Democratic presidential campaign and get them to sign some sort of a pledge that they would promise to prioritize human rights in North Korea once they are in office. And I would love, and I think this is something where a broader community can play a role, to see the issue of human rights in North Korea put on the debate platform, so brought up as questions. In dealing with North Korea and its appalling record of brutality and abuse towards its citizens, it is easy to become discouraged. But this is a temptation we must not succumb to. Whenever I find myself heading down that path of discouragement, I think of my father. As I said, somebody who had experienced and witnessed in his life some of the worst that humanity could produce, and yet it had a very positive impact in his life. It made him determined to fight for the dignity and rights of all people and to never rest in that fight. But what was truly remarkable about my father was that despite what he had experienced in life, he remained a profoundly optimistic man. Whenever I was downcast or alarmed at the state of the world, he would say to me in his beautiful, rich Hungarian accent, he would say, "Don't worry, darling. We are just bending a windy corner of history. And right around that corner will be bright blue skies and wonderful possibilities." I sense that same spirit of determination and hope in people like my colleague here today, Kang Hwan, in Ji Song Ho. And it is my hope and my prayer that North Korea will soon round this windy corner of history, and that its future will be bright and full of hope. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, especially for the last set of comments. I was looking for something to be optimistic about, and you lifted our spirits, especially after all the very powerful and, I have to say, depressing information about what's going on in North Korea. We'll take questions, and if you could raise your hand, Brina will go to the microphone. I just want to make sure I understand one thing that Mr. Khan said about how if we or the the Trump administration, if the focus is on human rights instead of denuclearization, then the North Korean regime will fall in 1 year. Is that what was said? Yep.
사실 북한 사람들은 핵 문제를 별로 중요하게 생각하지 않습니다. 왜냐하면 북한 문제의 핵심은 핵 문제가 아니라 수령 절대주의라고 하는 그 우상 숭배 시스템이라고 저는 봅니다.
Actually, the North Korean people do not think nuclearization is an important issue. For them, the key is idolatry.
그 수령 절대주의 체제를 유지하기 위해서 이제 핵무기가 필요한 것이죠.
In order to maintain this regime, nuclear is necessary.
예, 그 만약 북한이 핵무기를 포기한다고 해서 수령 절대주의가 포기되는 건 아닙니다. 이 말인즉은 북한의 핵무기라는 것은 수령 절대주의 체제가 붕괴돼야 핵무기가 사라진다고 저는 보고 있습니다.
So I think only when the North Korean regime collapses, the nuclear problem will disappear.
수령 절대주의의 가장 큰 어떤 그 모습은 바로 인권 유린이죠. 강제 수용소가 필요하게 되고 많은 사람들 직결 처형해야 되고 또 많은 사람들을 굶주림으로 내몰아야 되는 그런 재앙이 바로 수령 절대주의 체제에서 일어나고 있습니다.
In order to maintain his regime and the totalitarianism, a lot of human rights violations are being committed, such as the concentration camps and the purges and executions.
그래서 북한 지도부는 항상 국제사회와 대화를 할 때 인권 문제를 피해서 핵 문제만 대화하기를 원합니다.
That's why the North Korean leadership, when engaging in conversation with the international community, never talks about human rights, but only about nuclearization.
그래서 이제 그 북한과 미국 간의 정상회담을 뭐 10번 한다고 쳐도 거기서 인권 문제가 안 나온다는 것은 그건 하나만한 해답이다.
That's why even if there are like tens of summits held, if the human rights issue is not addressed, it's not going to be a productive summit.
만약 이제 인권 문제를 만약 트럼프 대통령이 정면으로 거론해서 이 문제를 이제 이슈화한다면 북한 정권은 정말 견디기 힘든 상황에 빠질 가능성이 높습니다. 근데 그럴 가능성이 저는 없다고 봅니다. 현재로서는.
If President Trump starts to address the North Korean human rights issues, then there will be a high chance that the regime will collapse. But unfortunately, I don't believe that's what's going to happen.
Thank you.
Let me just briefly say, I couldn't agree more with what Kang Hwan said, and he has an insight that unfortunately the U.S. government doesn't seem to have. You know, if President Trump were to say, to highlight 400 plus officials have been executed since he came to power, all of the people around him, that this shows that this is a rogue regime that, and shows him to be weak because he clearly can't trust anyone that he works with, right? And the international community were to put pressure to stop executing people, right? And to highlight every time it happens, right? All of a sudden, he would be under pressure and less capable of getting away with this with total impunity. And this would make it much easier for senior officials in the government who must be scared out of their minds to feel like they have the license to be able to look to depose him. And if you depose him and have a better option than Kim Jong-un in power, then maybe, just maybe, you have a better chance to engage in a more productive discussion about the future of North Korea and denuclearization. But this guy, in light of his having doubled down on the repression of the North Korean regime and its own people, combined with a level of terror that was never imposed by his father or grandfather among the senior leadership, is barely holding on to power. And yet by giving him a global stage to talk to President Trump, focusing on nuclear and ignoring human rights, he gets a free pass to hold his entire senior leadership and his country at his beck and call and with his foot on their necks. And so reversing the focus actually is probably the most effective way that one could think about getting back around to the nuclear issue in a way that could be more productive.
Hi, my name is Jong Hera, and I'm a master's student in School of Public Health. I'm also from South Korea, so I was really was intrigued how well I knew about human rights in North Korea was bad, but I was intrigued. I didn't know it was this bad, and I just have a couple of comments about and I guess questions. So I'm the person that see that this summit, upcoming summit and the past summit is really going a good way because it has been gone never has been gone this far before and never has talked this much before, although it's not satisfactory. And so I believe although this second summit would not just like produce denuclearization, I hope that it would end up denuclearization, but I was surprised that you were all kind of pessimistic and said that it was a lie. And I was wondering because I believe that not doing the economic sanction anymore and denuclearization also would promote human rights in North Korea in that way. But if but if United States still believes that North Korea is still lying and not believing in their gesture of trying to improve, then I don't think it's gonna go anywhere. And if it collapses, then it might even be worse for their human rights of North Korean people. And I'm really surprised that there was no any kind of I guess mention about or like part of South Korea in this presentation, because I guess we also have significant part, at least I guess. I really don't know about it, but, and yeah. And lastly, I think the human right in North Korea cannot be discussed without political situation, because it's really unique situation in North Korea. So yeah, I guess my question following is, well, if like this summit goes well, and if it goes to the way that like North Korea would give permission for other countries to help other people and help the people in North Korea and all that, how do you think this would change the humanitarian action in North Korea for international students?
Thank you. Let's take one more. We want to bundle some questions. I think I had saw a hand there. If not, we'll just let you answer.
Well, thank you for the question. You know, Winston Churchill, during the Second World War, said, it's always better to jaw than to war. And so I don't think any of us want to see these summits not take place, because of course denuclearization is important and there is value in talk. But there are other lessons we learned from history about the danger of talk leading to appeasement. And I think the concern you saw reflected in the three of us up here is that the result of the first summit was both a raising of the stature of Kim Jong-un. You know, he sort of came out of the shadows as this absolutely shunned and despised figure, and there he was on the world stage with the President of the United States, the two of them engaging respectfully and cordially with one another. And this is a man whose hands are dripping with blood. I believe that, where are you, Peter? Anyway, there's going to be a press conference coming up, I think, on Friday in Washington, where people will be pleading with, you know, President Trump, don't take that extended bloody hand. And the danger of normalizing, legitimizing, excusing this mind-boggling Hitlerian-level conduct by this ruler is a very real danger. And I also think, you know, history teaches us that appeasement doesn't work. Appeasement doesn't work even when it is extremely well-intentioned, when the goal is to avoid human suffering, when the goal is to, you know, peace, not war. Appeasement on the terms of the forces of evil is a very, very bad idea. Now, I think that President Trump, precisely because he is, you know, a little crazy himself, and precisely because he doesn't pull back from threatening going to war and saying, I'll do whatever it takes, and we're not kicking the can down the road because we're out of road, could be in a position to make progress on denuclearization and human rights, but only if they're linked. As somebody who's been involved in human rights for a long time, my very considered opinion is that whenever American policymakers de-link human rights from our other policy goals with bad actors, whether it's China, whether it's North Korea, whether it's Iran, when we de-link that and we say, well, we're going to sort of silo this off. Human rights are very, very important, but they're actually not important enough to have on the table when we're negotiating the real nitty-gritty of our relationship. The minute you de-link them, you demote and devalue human rights, and nothing positive will happen. The occasional gesture will occur, but nothing meaningful will happen. So I think there needs to be linkage, and there needs to be toughness, and this naivete and this talk about beautiful letters and falling in love and, you know, et cetera, has to end.
Let me just add also, I mean, for me, I strongly support dialogue, including with anybody, any world leader, including Kim Jong-un. But my experience going up against literally almost 36 authoritarian governments around the world over many, many years, and I've seen it play out this way over and over and over again, is for a dialogue to be effective, it has to come with benchmarks, timelines, and consequences for an action. In other words, you don't just have a dialogue to talk, because what happens anytime a dialogue begins on a global problem, the motto, I don't mean to denigrate diplomats, because diplomats do important things, but oftentimes it feels to me, as a human rights lawyer and advocate, that the motto of many diplomats is, why do today what we can push off until tomorrow? And by that what I mean is that the moment that a dialogue is announced, the pressure that might have been in place on human rights and on all these kinds of issues evaporates, because nobody wants to get in the way of giving space for a dialogue to be effective. So dialogue always favors the oppressor. That has been my experience over and over and over again. And the way you avoid it favoring the oppressor is you get concessions up front, for example, the release of a country's political prisoners in advance as a price tag for a dialogue, right? You don't just go and have a dialogue with no upfront commitment. That way, if the dialogue fails, you've still gotten something. You have it time limited, 30 days, right? You say, we need to agree on several things that are going to happen, confidence building measures on both sides that need to be completed within 30 days, right? And then you can see about the goodwill of both sides. You know, in that circumstance, the US would give something and Kim Jong-un would give something, and it would be small things as a start, but let's see if he'll deliver on anything. And I think for me, the reason why I have not been a big fan of what happened with the last summit, and I'm not a big fan of this summit, is that President Trump came out of the last summit saying that they've already denuclearized. They've already taken steps to denuclearize, and that's just factually inaccurate. They've given up nothing. They've gained an enormous amount, and we've seen how human rights has been relegated to not only not a priority, but to no issue at all. So I'm all for dialogue, but dialogue with benchmarks, timelines, and consequences so that we can see whether it's going to go somewhere. And if it's going to go somewhere, I'll be the first person to support it. If we see small confidence building measures, we're not going to solve all the problems at once. So if we can see some small things going forward, I'll give them the benefit of the doubt and see if they'll do something else, and we do something else. And that's the way that you move forward in building trust. But my view is that what's happened in the last summit was not a trust-building exercise. Nothing was delivered, and he won in enormous ways in terms of his global credibility. And the human rights community working in North Korea, and more importantly, the North Korean people, lost, right? Because those issues are now no longer on the stage.
Hi, thank you all so much for coming today and for all that you've done for advocating for human rights and in North Korea and elsewhere. My name is Kate Clem. I work here as a staff here at the university. You've all spoken a lot about the effects on North Korea through high politics, dialogue between leaders, which is of course really important, but I wanted to know more what you think about a grassroots approach to the end of the regime in North Korea, and if we as a global community started focusing more on defectors who have escaped their connections to North Korea, focusing on nonprofits both in the US and in South Korea, such as Liberty in North Korea, all the work they're doing, the updated info, coming out about the Jangmadang and what the people are doing on the ground in North Korea, the millennial generation, they're just more access to knowledge through Chinese technology and knowledge about the outside world. So I just wanted to hear more about your thoughts on that rather than just high politics. Thanks.
Well, I'll give one quick response on that. One of the big issues we work on at the Lantos Foundation is internet freedom. And closed societies, China, of course, has the Great Firewall, North Korea, Iran. These countries do everything in their power to cut their citizens off from free access to knowledge about what's going on in the rest of the world. And of course, no country was more famous or infamous for doing that than North Korea, the Hermit Kingdom that really sought to completely wall its citizens off from the world. The reason I think internet freedom and US policy supporting internet freedom and supporting technologies that can enable people in closed societies to safely, anonymously circumvent firewalls, circumvent censorship technologies to access the internet is that at the end of the day, America can't create freedom in North Korea. America can't go around, just willy-nilly attempting to change regimes or overthrow regimes or, sort of micromanage or macromanage the world. There has to be, as you say, that grassroots indigenous movement, that demand on the part of people within a country that is experiencing the sort of repression they have there, that they have to have ways that they can find the courage to take the risks that only ultimately they can take on their own behalf. We cannot do on behalf of other peoples what they will ultimately need to choose and find and demand and seize for themselves. And I believe that internet freedom and them being able to safely, without fear of being tracked by their government, find out what's going on, access the information that they have accumulated of these hundreds of top North Korean officials who have been massacred. I mean, what would that tell any people in any country about the vulnerability, the creakiness of their regime that this was going on, how that would inspire and empower them to take risks. So that's one thing, is internet freedom, and our government is currently not doing as much as it could to robustly support technologies created often by defectors, often by people who have escaped from closed societies because they feel so passionately about this.
We need to close now, but we can carry a conversation outside. We have a reception out there. But I want to give one last word to, especially in terms of like South Korean government's role in this, because there was a question about that. South Korean government and what role the sunshine policy of President Moon might be playing.
사실 북한 문제 해결에 한국 정부의 역할이 가장 중요하죠. 하지만 불행하게도 이제 한국 정부의 대북 정책이 보수 진보 정권에 따라서 너무 180도로 달라지기 때문에 이게 과연 이제 북한 주민들에게 어떤 영향을 주냐가 상당히 중요한 것 같습니다. 그러니까 그 중간이 없는 것 같아요. 왕창 막다가 왕창 풀겠다. 그 중간이 뭐냐? 북한 주민들에 대한 이익이 전혀 없습니다. 북한 주민들을 위해서 뭘 하겠다는 게 전혀 없어요. 한국 정부의 대북 정책이라는 것이.
Of course, the role of the South Korean government is very important. But unfortunately, when we look at the North Korean policy within South Korea, it depends on the ideology. It too much depends on the ideology of what government is in place. It's always one extreme to the other extreme. There is no consideration and no real thoughts given to the people of North Korea.
그 예를 들면 이제 개성공단이라는 게 있었습니다. 그러니까 이제 한국 기업에서 북한에 투자해서 북한 근로자들을 이제 활용했던 그 개성공단이라는 게 있었는데 저는 사실은 그 모델을 찬성했습니다. 해야 된다. 근데 이제 결과를 보니까 이건 너무나 이제 어처구니 없는 노예노동만 양산하고 있다는 저희 결론을 가지고 있는데, 왜냐하면 북한 정권은 한국 기업이 북한 근로자에게 월급을 줄 수 없게 만들어놨습니다. 그러니까 몽땅 월급을 정권에 주게 하고 북한 정권은 북한 근로자들에게 거의 한 15분의 1도 안 되는 돈을 주면서 돈을 다 떼먹었죠. 그리고 개성공단에 있는 모든 북한 근로자들은 북한의 국가안전 보위부에 의해서 철저하게 감시당해서 남측의 기업 사람들하고 절대로 이제 대화를 못하게 만들어놨습니다. 그러니까 완벽한 노예노동의 어떤 시장을 만들어놨죠. 저는 그랬습니다. 개성공단을 제대로 하려면 북한 근로자에게 남한 기업이 임금을 직접 줘라. 그리고 이 공단 내에서는 북한의 정보기관이 개입하지 못하게 하라. 그래서 남북한 근로자가 편하게 만나서 대화도 하고 월급도 받고 이런 정상적인 어떤 그런 기업 활동을 해야 되는데, 이건 북한식 모델을 남측이 수용함으로 인해서 그냥 북한 근로자들은 노예화시킨 그 모델을 만드는 거죠. 그러니까 여기에는 북한 주민에 대한 이익이 아무것도 없는 겁니다. 그러니까 이런 식의 남북 협력이라는 것은 사실 의미가 없어요. 제가 보건대는.
Currently, when we look at the attempts of South Korean and North Korean governmental cooperation, I can give you one example of Kaesong. When South Korean corporates hired the North Korean people, but in my opinion, it failed miserably. It only ended up using the North Korean people as slaves, because the reason behind this is because the North government intervened in this process. They took away all the wages given that were supposed to go to the North Koreans. The North Koreans only received about 1/15 of the wages that South Korea gave. They were always monitored. They were not allowed to have any conversation with the South Koreans. In short, they were treated like slaves. So I believe that if we are to continue this kind of cooperation, my suggestion is that the wages are given directly to the North Korean people instead of through the government, and that the North Korean government does not intervene in this process.
그래서 한국 정부가 북한의 김정은과 그 집권 세력에게 관심 있는 것이 아니라 북한 주민에게 관심을 가져야 되는데 현재까지 북한 주민에게 관심을 가져본 적이 별로 없어요. 제가 보건대는. 그래서 대북 정책이 항상 실패했다고 저는 보고 있습니다. 북한 주민에게 포커스를 맞추고 북한 주민들의 이익을 추구했더라면 벌써 북한은 변화됐죠. 그렇지만 계속 지금까지도 김정은에게만 포커스를 맞추고 있어요. 그럼 북한 주민들은 항상 노예화돼 있고 그들의 권리는 누가 챙깁니까? 전혀 그런 주체가 없어요. 그렇기 때문에 한국 정부의 역할이라는 게 사실 별로 의미가 없다 요새는.
The South Korean government only focuses on Kim Jong-un and never on the people of North Korea. I believe that's why we've always seen failure in the relationship. South Korea has never worked for the benefit of the North Korean people. Who can represent the North Korean people? That's why I do not trust the South Korean government to be successful in this relationship.
그러니까 최근에 이제 한국의 국회의장이란 분이 이런 말을 했습니다. 트럼프와 김정은과의 회담이 한반도의 운명을 결정짓는다. 이게 말이 되는 얘기입니까? 한반도의 운명을 결정짓는 것은 북한 주민들을 노예에서 해방시키기 위한 한국민의 의지와 노력에 의해서 결정되는 것이지 트럼프하고 김정은에게 무슨 권한으로 결정을 합니까? 그런 황당무계한 얘기를 하는 게 한국의 국회의장이라고 하니까 너무나 부끄럽고 어떻게 저런 사람이 국회의장까지 하는지 참 저는 이해가 안 됩니다. 사실은 저게.
Recently, in South Korea, they said that the fate of the Korean Peninsula depends on President Trump and Kim Jong-un. How can someone say this? The fate of our country depends on the people who live in the country, not by Trump and Kim Jong-un.
Great, thank you. Please join us for the reception outside, and also please join me in thanking the wonderful panelists. And thank you to Ms. Lee for the wonderful translation work. It's outside.